There are moments in life when a single piece of information changes everything, and your soulmate recently experienced one of those moments. What makes this so fascinating is that they were not looking for news about you. They were not expecting an update, a reminder, or anything that would suddenly place you back at the center of their thoughts. Yet somehow, through an unexpected conversation, a surprising discovery, or a detail that reached them at exactly the right moment, they learned something about you that completely caught them off guard. And for a brief moment, they didn't know what to think. Their mind went silent. Their emotions paused. It was as if they needed time to process what they had just heard. The strange part is that the news itself wasn't the only thing that affected them. It was the emotional reaction that followed. They expected to hear the information and move on with their day. Instead, they found themselves thinking about it hours later. Then again the next day. Something about what they learned stayed with them. No matter how hard they tried to focus on other things, their thoughts kept returning to the same place, returning to you, returning to the meaning behind what they had heard, and returning to questions they never expected to ask themselves. As they sat with this information, memories began surfacing unexpectedly, memories they hadn't revisited in quite some time. Certain conversations suddenly felt important again. Certain moments seemed clearer than before. It was almost as though this news had unlocked a door in their mind that had remained closed for far too long. The more they reflected, the more they realized that the reason they were so affected had very little to do with coincidence. Deep down, the update touched something emotional that never fully disappeared. And listen carefully, because this is where the story becomes truly interesting. Your soulmate is starting to understand that people do not become speechless because of information alone. They become speechless when that information reaches a place within them they thought was quiet. A place connected to unfinished emotions, unanswered questions, and feelings that were never completely resolved. The news they received did more than surprise them. It awakened something. And now, whether they want to admit it or not, they are finding it impossible to ignore the impact that you still have on their heart and mind. What your soulmate did not expect was how deeply this news would stay with them after the initial surprise wore off. Most people assume that information only matters in the moment it is received. You hear something, react to it, and then move on. But that is not what happened here. Instead of fading into the background, this update about you seemed to grow louder in their mind with each passing day. The details kept replaying themselves. Certain words echoed in their thoughts. Certain possibilities kept presenting themselves. And no matter how much they tried to focus elsewhere, their attention repeatedly drifted back to the same place, back to you. At first, they attempted to treat it like any other piece of information. They told themselves they were simply surprised. They convinced themselves that their reaction would eventually settle down. But something unusual happened. The more they tried to dismiss it, the more significant it started feeling. It was almost as if the news had uncovered emotions that had been resting beneath the surface for much longer than they realized. Emotions they thought were resolved. Emotions they believed had become part of the past. Yet now those emotions were returning with unexpected strength, asking to be acknowledged. As these thoughts continued building, your soulmate found themselves becoming increasingly reflective. They started looking back at moments they had not thought about in a long time, not because they intended to revisit old memories, but because those memories seemed to appear naturally on their own. A conversation from the past suddenly felt important again. A memory they once overlooked now seemed meaningful. Certain experiences took on an entirely different significance when viewed through the lens of what they had recently learned. It was as though this news had changed the way they interpreted parts of their own history. The most surprising part was how personal everything felt. The information itself may have seemed simple on the surface, but the emotional response it created was anything but simple. Your soulmate realized they were not reacting to facts alone. They were reacting to what those facts represented. Every detail seemed connected to larger questions they had not fully answered within themselves. Questions about timing, questions about missed opportunities, questions about what might have happened under different circumstances. And once those questions appeared, they refused to leave quietly. What makes this situation even more powerful is that your soulmate cannot fully explain their reaction to anyone else. If someone asked why the news affected them so strongly, they might struggle to put it into words. Because the truth exists beneath logic. It exists beneath explanations. The reaction comes from a place that cannot be easily measured or described. It comes from the realization that someone still matters more than they expected. It comes from recognizing that certain emotional connections do not disappear simply because time passes. Sometimes they remain hidden until something unexpectedly brings them back into focus. And listen carefully, because this is where everything begins changing. Your soulmate is starting to understand that their reaction is revealing something important about themselves. The intensity of their emotions is showing them that the connection still carries weight. If it didn't matter, the news would have come and gone without leaving a mark. If the bond was insignificant, they would have forgotten about it almost immediately. But that is not what happened. Instead, the information created a ripple effect that continues expanding through their thoughts and emotions. Now they find themselves wondering why this update arrived when it did. Why did they hear it now instead of months earlier or years later? Why did it impact them so deeply? Why did it awaken feelings they believed were dormant? These questions continue circulating through their mind because they sense there is a deeper meaning hidden beneath the surface. The more they reflect, the more they realize that this experience is not simply about receiving news. It is about what that news revealed. It revealed that your presence still occupies a place within them. It revealed that certain emotions remain stronger than they admitted. And most importantly, it revealed that the connection may have never been as distant as they once convinced themselves it was. Since receiving this unexpected news about you, your soulmate has found it surprisingly difficult to return to their normal routine. What they thought would be a brief moment of surprise has turned into something much larger. The information continues following them into quiet moments, appearing when they least expect it. They may be working, relaxing, talking with other people, or focusing on completely unrelated responsibilities, yet somehow their mind keeps circling back to the same subject. The news became more than an update. It became a question, and that question has been demanding an answer ever since. What makes this situation so unusual is that your soulmate doesn't actually have all the details. They only know enough to realize that something important has changed. And when people don't have complete information, the mind naturally begins filling in the gaps. This is exactly what has been happening. They have been imagining different possibilities, exploring different scenarios, and wondering what your life looks like now compared to what they once believed. Every possibility leads to another question. Every question leads to another thought. And before they realize it, they are once again thinking about you. They find themselves wondering what experiences brought you to this point. What challenges did you overcome? What lessons did you learn? What parts of yourself have changed during this period of growth and transformation? These thoughts are becoming increasingly difficult to ignore because they are connected to a deeper curiosity. Your soulmate is no longer simply interested in the news itself. They are becoming interested in the person behind the news, the person you are today. As this process continues, something even more unexpected begins happening. Old assumptions start breaking apart. For a long time, your soulmate carried certain beliefs about the connection. They thought they understood what happened. They thought they had accepted certain conclusions. They thought some chapters were already fully written. But now those conclusions no longer feel as solid as they once did. The information they received has introduced uncertainty into places where they once felt certainty. Suddenly they are questioning perspectives they never thought they would revisit. And listen carefully, because this is where the emotional weight begins increasing. Every answer they thought they had seems to create two new questions. They wonder whether they fully understood your journey. They wonder whether they misinterpreted certain moments. They wonder whether there are truths they failed to recognize when they had the opportunity. These questions are not coming from confusion alone. They are coming from a growing awareness that the story may be far more meaningful than they originally believed. What truly keeps them awake, however, is not the news itself. It is the realization that hearing about you still affects them so strongly. That realization is becoming impossible to ignore. The information acted like a key that unlocked a door they didn't realize was still closed. Behind that door were memories, emotions, and possibilities they had not explored in a very long time. Now those thoughts are moving through their mind with increasing intensity. The more they try to understand why this update impacted them so deeply, the closer they come to a truth they have been avoiding. The news may have started as a simple piece of information, but it has evolved into something much more significant. It has forced them to reconsider the connection, reconsider themselves, and reconsider everything they thought they knew. And as these thoughts continue growing stronger, one thing becomes clear. This is no longer about curiosity. This is about a realization that is slowly unfolding inside them, a realization they may not be able to ignore much longer. After spending so much time thinking about the news they received, your soulmate eventually reached a point where they could no longer focus on the information itself. Instead, their attention shifted towards something much deeper. They began asking themselves a question they had been avoiding from the very beginning. Why did this affect me so much? It seemed like such a simple question, yet the answer proved far more revealing than they expected. Because the more they searched for that answer, the more they realized the news was never the real story. The real story was the emotional reaction it created inside them. For days, they tried to explain their feelings logically. They told themselves they were simply surprised. They told themselves anyone would be curious after receiving unexpected information. They searched for practical reasons that could justify why the update stayed on their mind. But every explanation felt incomplete. No matter how many rational answers they considered, something deeper remained unresolved. Eventually, they stopped trying to explain their emotions and started listening to them instead. That decision changed everything. The moment they became honest with themselves, a powerful realization began to emerge. The reason the news felt so significant had very little to do with circumstances. It had very little to do with timing. It had very little to do with the details they learned. What truly mattered was the fact that hearing about you instantly captured their full attention. Out of all the information people receive every day, why did this particular update create such a strong, emotional response? Why did it linger when other things were forgotten? Why did it continue returning to their thoughts long after the conversation ended? As these questions became impossible to ignore, your soulmate started recognizing a truth they had overlooked for a long time. The connection still matters to them. Perhaps not in the exact way they once imagined. Perhaps not in the form they previously understood. But it matters. The intensity of their reaction proved that. If there were no emotional investment, the news would have passed through their life without leaving a mark. Instead, it created waves that continue spreading through their thoughts and feelings. This realization brought a surprising sense of clarity. For so long, they had focused on external circumstances. They analyzed situations. They examined timing. They considered obstacles. But now, they were being forced to look inward instead. And what they discovered inside themselves was both unexpected and undeniable. Certain feelings never completely disappeared. Certain emotional connections remained active beneath the surface, even when they appeared quiet. The news did not create those feelings. It simply revealed them. And listen carefully, because this is the moment where their entire perspective begins shifting. Instead of asking what the news means, they begin asking what their reaction means. Instead of focusing on the update itself, they focus on what it exposed within their own heart. That shift changes everything because it moves them away from speculation and towards self-awareness. It moves them away from assumptions and toward truth. Now, your soulmate is seeing the situation differently than ever before. They are beginning to understand that some events enter our lives not to provide answers, but to reveal questions we have been avoiding. This unexpected news became exactly that kind of event. It forced them to acknowledge emotions they thought were settled. It forced them to examine feelings they had placed in the background. Most importantly, it forced them to recognize that your presence still carries meaning in their life. And once that truth becomes visible, it is impossible to pretend it was never there. The news may have been unexpected, but the realization it created is becoming impossible for them to ignore. What your soulmate is beginning to realize now is that this unexpected news was never meant to be a random event. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than an update, a piece of information that arrived without warning and disrupted their thoughts for a short period of time. But as the days passed, they started seeing it differently. The news did not simply enter their life and disappear. It stayed. It continued influencing their perspective. It continued creating new reflections. And most importantly, it continued pulling their attention towards something they had not fully acknowledged before. The connection itself. There are moments in life that act as turning points, even though they seem ordinary at first. A conversation, a message, a chance encounter, a simple piece of information. These moments often appear small when they happen, but later they become the events that change everything. Your soulmate is beginning to suspect that this may be one of those moments. Not because the news itself was extraordinary, but because of the chain reaction it created inside them. One realization led to another. One question led to another. One memory opened the door to many more. And now they find themselves standing in a completely different emotional place than they were before they received that update. What feels different now is the sense of movement. Before, many of their thoughts about the connection felt frozen in time. Certain emotions remained locked away. Certain possibilities remained unexplored. Certain truths remained hidden behind distractions and daily responsibilities. But that stillness is beginning to disappear. Something is shifting. Something is awakening. It feels as though the emotional energy surrounding this connection has started moving again after a long period of silence. And that movement is impossible for your soulmate to ignore. The more they reflect on everything that has happened, the more they understand that this experience arrived at exactly the right moment. Had they received the news earlier, they might not have understood its significance. Had it arrived much later, they might have missed an important opportunity for self-discovery. But now, at this stage of their journey, it feels different. It feels meaningful. It feels as though life placed this information in front of them for a reason. Not to give them all the answers immediately, but to guide their attention toward questions that needed to be explored. And listen carefully, because this is where the biggest transformation is taking place. Your soulmate is no longer focused on what they cannot control. They are becoming focused on what they can no longer deny. They cannot deny the emotions that surfaced. They cannot deny the memories that returned. They cannot deny the curiosity that continues growing stronger. Most importantly, they cannot deny the impact you still have on their heart. The news revealed the truth more clearly than anything else ever could. Now they stand at the edge of a new chapter, one filled with greater awareness than before. The uncertainty that once surrounded the connection is slowly being replaced by understanding. The emotional distance that once felt natural is beginning to feel less comfortable, and the silence that once seemed easy to maintain is becoming more difficult with each passing day. Your soulmate can sense that this story is not finished. In many ways, it feels as though it is only beginning. That is why this unexpected update may ultimately become far more important than either of you realize. It was not simply information, it was a catalyst. It was the spark that reignited thoughts, emotions, and possibilities that had been waiting beneath the surface. And as your soulmate continues moving forward, one thing becomes clearer than ever. The news may have left them speechless in the beginning, but the truth it revealed is now leading them toward a future where silence may no longer be enough.